The call came at 7:23 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. I remember the exact time because I was running batch validation reports for our sterile injectable line, and interruptions during QA reviews are the kind of thing that keeps me up at night. My phone buzzed against the stainless steel workbench. Protocol violation, technically speaking, but after 25 years in pharmaceutical quality assurance, I allow myself certain small liberties. The text was from my sister, short and direct, the way our family handles bad news. Dad's gone, heart attack in his sleep. Funeral home wants to know when you can get there. I'm Ryan Patterson, 47 years old, and I've been the named qualified person at Hayes Pharmaceutical for the past 8 years. In the pharma world, that title isn't just a job description, it's a legal responsibility. Every pill, every injection, every capsule that leaves our facility has to have my signature approving it. Without me physically present and signing off, this place is just an expensive warehouse full of regulated chemicals. I didn't cry when I read that text. You don't survive a quarter century in quality control by getting emotional about disruptions. Dad was 78, had smoked 2 packs a day for 40 years, and thought vegetables were a communist conspiracy. His departure wasn't exactly a surprise. But biology creates certain obligations, and I was the only child left to handle the arrangements. Dad worked 35 years at the steel mill before it closed down in '98. He came home every day with grease under his fingernails and pride in his voice when he talked about the bridges and buildings that used his steel. He taught me that experience matters, that doing things right matters, and that shortcuts usually cost more than they save. Son, he used to say, regulations are written in other people's blood. Don't forget that. I walked straight up to the executive floor to file for FMLA leave. Indiana law is clear about funeral arrangements for immediate family, and federal law backs it up. I've read every regulation that affects this industry. It's part of staying alive in a job where one mistake can put people in the hospital. The executive floor smelled different from production. Down in my lab, we dealt with facts, temperature readings, pH levels, contamination counts. Up here on the 4th floor, they dealt in abstractions, synergy, optimization, disruption. The air carried the scent of expensive coffee and nervous ambition. Jordan Hayes was sitting behind her glass desk, typing on a laptop covered with motivational stickers that probably cost more than most of our production workers make in a day. Jordan is 32, has an MBA from some school that advertises on podcasts, and got hired as VP of Operations about 6 months ago. She also happens to be the daughter of Preston Hayes, our CEO and company founder. The Patagonia vest she wore indoors probably cost more than my first car. Ryan the Reliable, she said without looking up from her screen. What's the situation? Please tell me you're not here to complain about the new efficiency protocols again. I placed the FMLA form on her desk with the same precision I used for handling controlled substances. My father died this morning. I need to initiate federal medical leave immediately. 3 days for funeral arrangements and estate settlement. Jordan stopped typing and looked at me with the kind of expression you'd give a piece of equipment that just malfunctioned at the worst possible moment. She blinked twice, then arranged her face into a mask of performative sympathy that she'd probably learned from a corporate training video. 3 days? Right now? Ryan, we're in the middle of our Q3 acceleration phase. You've got that $15 million distribution run for the West Coast launching Friday. The optics of our lead QA officer disappearing. Not great. Death doesn't check the quarterly calendar, I replied, keeping my voice level. I'm the named qualified person on our federal license. I'm notifying you that I'll be unavailable, not asking permission. She leaned back in her chair, making that condescending face that privileged kids perfect by age 10. The kind of expression that says they've never had to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. See, this is what I mean about old school mentality, Ryan. You're thinking about personal downtime when you should be thinking about team synergy. We're a family here, and families don't abandon ship because of external variables. I felt my jaw tighten. A family. Right. The kind of family where the daughter gets a corner office and a 6-figure salary fresh out of business school, while the people who actually know how to make the products get called old school for following federal law. Federal Medical Leave Act isn't a suggestion, Jordan. It's law. Look, she said, waving her hand dismissively. Take the time if you absolutely have to. But this kind of inflexibility, this dinosaur mentality, it doesn't exactly scream leadership material to me. We need agile thinkers here, not people who crumble every time life happens. Dinosaur. The word hung in the air like contamination in a clean room. I'd heard it before, whispered in meetings when they thought I couldn't hear. The old guy who insists on following every regulation to the letter. The one who slows down the innovation process with his outdated concerns about safety and compliance. "I'll see you Monday," I said, turning to leave. "Make sure you check your email," she called after me. "Might need you to hop on some Zoom calls if any issues come up." I walked to the elevator with my hands shaking, not from grief but from pure rage at being called a dinosaur by someone whose biggest career challenge was probably figuring out which trust fund to tap for her MBA. She thought she was managing some burned-out middle manager who could be bullied into compliance. She had no idea she'd just poked a man who knew exactly where every regulatory body was buried in this company. The elevator descended past the executive floor, past the administrative offices, down to the production level, where people like my father had built this country with their hands and their sweat. Where regulations weren't abstract concepts, but the difference between going home safe and not going home at all. The funeral was exactly what you'd expect for a man who'd spent his life working with his hands. Cheap, raining, and filled with Dad's old crew from the mill, guys with weathered faces and coughs that sounded like machinery running dry. They stood around the graveside in their good suits, the ones they kept for weddings and funerals, talking quietly about the old days when American steel meant something. I stood there in my black coat, watching them lower the budget casket into Indiana clay. The funeral director had tried to upsell me on bronze handles and silk lining, but Dad would have laughed at that kind of waste. He was practical right to the end, even left instructions for the cheapest option available. "Don't spend money on a box I'm not going to use," he'd written in his barely legible handwriting. My phone buzzed constantly throughout the service. 41 missed calls from the plant by the time we got back from the cemetery. 18 emails marked urgent with increasing numbers of exclamation points as the hours passed. Subject lines like critical, QA approval needed, and where are you? I didn't answer one of them. FMLA means leave. Leave means I'm not working. If the building was on fire, they could call 911. If the FDA showed up for a surprise inspection, well, maybe they should have thought about that before calling federal bereavement leave personal downtime. The wake was held at Murphy's Tavern, the same place where Dad and his crew had been drinking beer and solving the world's problems for 30 years. The bartender, an old guy named Eddie who'd known Dad since the Carter administration, kept the drinks flowing and the stories coming. Stories about the time Dad caught a safety violation that could have killed half the night shift, about how he'd trained 3 generations of steelworkers to read blueprints and check their measurements twice. "Your old man saved more lives than a doctor," Eddie told me, sliding another beer across the bar. He understood that when you're working with tons of molten metal, there's no such thing as close enough. That was Dad's philosophy. Precision mattered. Standards mattered. The rules were written in blood, and forgetting that got people hurt. He'd carried that mentality from the steel mill to everything else in his life. His taxes were always filed early, his truck was maintained like a Swiss watch, and he'd read every word of any contract before signing it. I got home around midnight, exhausted and smelling of cigarette smoke and industrial-strength coffee. My apartment was quiet, clean, and organized exactly the way I liked it. Everything in its place, every surface sanitized, every document filed correctly. It's how you survive in quality control. Chaos in your personal life leads to mistakes at work, and mistakes at work can kill people. I opened my laptop and started going through the frantic emails from Hayes Pharmaceutical. The tone progression was fascinating from a psychological standpoint. Monday's messages were professional but urgent. Tuesdays were increasingly desperate. By Wednesday, they were barely coherent panic. From Jordan Hayes, sent at 11:47 p.m. Tuesday, "Ryan, where are you? The batch records for Lot 44B are sitting on your desk unsigned. We have trucks scheduled for Friday morning. This is unacceptable." From Ashley Monroe, the 22-year-old they'd apparently brought in as my temporary replacement, sent at 2:13 a.m. Wednesday, "I don't understand these forms. The computer won't let me approve anything without a QP signature. Can someone help me? This is really stressful." From Preston Hayes himself, the CEO, sent at 6:45 a.m. Wednesday, "Patterson, family emergency or not, you have responsibilities to this company. We need those batch records signed today." I leaned back in my chair, sipping a beer that tasted like vindication. They still didn't understand what they'd done. They thought they were dealing with an employee who could be bullied back to work. They had no idea they were dealing with a federal compliance nightmare that was about to explode in their faces. See, the thing about being a named qualified person is that it's not just a job title. It's a legal designation that means I am personally, criminally liable if contaminated drugs leave that building. The FDA doesn't care about corporate hierarchy or quarterly targets. They care about one thing: accountability. If people die because of a bad batch, they need a specific human being to handcuff. For 8 years, that person had been me. I'd signed my name on thousands of batch records, each signature a legal guarantee that the products met federal safety standards. Without my signature, or the signature of someone I'd explicitly authorized as my deputy, those drugs couldn't legally be sold. And here's the beautiful part. Jordan had fired me before I could authorize anyone as my replacement. In her rush to show Daddy how tough she was, she'd created a legal impossibility. The company needed a QP to operate, but the only QP they had was the guy they'd just called a dinosaur and kicked to the curb. I pulled out my personal files, the ones I kept at home because quality control officers are professional pack rats. 25 years of documentation, including complete copies of every FDA license, every batch record template, every standard operating procedure I'd written or revised. Corporate IT departments think they're gods because they can revoke access and wipe hard drives, but they always forget that experienced workers keep their own copies of critical documents. I found what I was looking for in a folder labeled Nuclear Options. Our FDA establishment license, printed and signed 8 years ago when I first took the QP position. Section 4, subsection B, in boring times. New Roman font, named qualified person, Ryan Patterson. License valid only upon continuous employment and direct oversight by designated QP. That single paragraph was worth more than all of Jordan's MBA credentials combined. It meant that the moment she'd terminated my employment, she'd accidentally turned Hayes Pharmaceutical into an unlicensed drug manufacturer. Every pill, every injection, every capsule they produced without me was technically contraband, but I wasn't going to call them and explain this. I wasn't going to save them from their own ignorance. Instead, I was going to let them dig their hole deeper while I documented every shovelful of dirt. I opened a new spreadsheet and started tracking their violations in real time, cross-referencing the panic emails with the production schedule I knew by heart. Tuesday, raw material weighing without QP oversight. Wednesday, compounding and mixing without proper authorization. Thursday would be sterile filling and packaging, every step creating more evidence of their federal crimes. By the time I was finished, Hayes Pharmaceutical wouldn't just be facing fines and warning letters. They'd be looking at criminal charges for interstate trafficking of misbranded drugs. I finished my beer and went to bed. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of Indiana weather that makes everything look like it needs a fresh coat of paint. I showed up at Hayes Pharmaceutical at 7:45 a.m., right on schedule, ready to get back to the controlled environment of my lab. After 3 days of funeral homes and insurance paperwork, I was looking forward to the familiar rhythm of batch reviews and contamination protocols. I swiped my badge at the employee turnstile, the same motion I'd performed thousands of times over 8 years. Beep. Access denied. I frowned and tried again, thinking maybe the rain had affected the magnetic strip. Beep. Access denied. Contact security. A cold weight settled in my stomach, the kind of feeling you get when a critical system alarm goes off in the middle of the night. I looked up to see Logan Pierce, head of plant security, and a guy I'd worked with for 15 years, walking toward the glass doors. Logan and I had started around the same time, back when the company was small enough that everyone knew everyone else's kids' names. He opened the door manually but blocked the entrance with his body, looking everywhere except at my eyes. "I'm sorry, Ryan. They deactivated your access at midnight. Orders came down from the 4th floor. Logan, I'm the Director of Quality Assurance. I have a batch release pending for Friday." "What's going on?" "You need to go to the loading dock," he said quietly. Jordan left instructions. There's a box, the loading dock, where they put the rejected materials and contaminated waste. I walked around the building's perimeter, my footsteps echoing off wet concrete, past the delivery trucks and industrial dumpsters to where my career was waiting for me on a wooden pallet. One cardboard box, my stapler, my framed certifications from 25 years of pharmaceutical work, a half-dead succulent that Megan from accounting had given me 3 years ago, and a manila envelope that probably contained the most expensive piece of paper Jordan Hayes would ever sign. Jordan was standing there with Kimberly from HR, who looked like she was about to throw up. Jordan, however, looked energized, practically vibrating with the kind of corporate adrenaline that comes from making tough decisions. She was holding what appeared to be a green smoothie that probably cost more than most people spend on lunch for a week. "Ryan!" she shouted over the noise of idling delivery trucks. "Welcome back." Or, well, goodbye, I guess. I walked up to the pallet where my professional life had been reduced to office supplies and paperwork. "What is this, Jordan?" "We're making some strategic workforce adjustments," she said, taking a long sip of her liquid vegetation. "Did some deep dive analysis while you were away, and frankly, your position represents a significant bottleneck in our optimization workflow. We need velocity, Ryan, we need adaptability. And taking 3 days off right before a major product launch shows a fundamental misalignment with our growth mindset. You're firing me for attending my father's funeral. We're restructuring due to cultural incompatibility," she corrected, flashing those expensive teeth that had probably been straightened with Daddy's money. "Plus, we found someone hungrier. Ashley Monroe, fresh out of state school, no bad habits, no legacy baggage. She started this morning." I stared at her, watching this 32-year-old trust fund baby destroy a $200 million company with her mouth. The sheer stupidity was breathtaking, like watching someone play with a live grenade while lecturing about safety procedures. "Jordan," I said, and for the first time that morning I felt something that wasn't rage. It was anticipation. "Does Ashley have her federal certifications?" "She's got a degree in biochemistry," Jordan beamed. "Very sharp, great with data analysis software. Really understands the modern pharmaceutical landscape. Does she have her registration as a named qualified person under 21 CFR Part 211? Jordan waved her hand dismissively, the same gesture she'd used to brush off 3 decades of regulatory law. "That's just paperwork, Ryan. We'll figure it out. The important thing is cultural fit. Don't be bitter about this. It causes wrinkles." She turned to Kimberly. "Give him the severance package." The envelope contained a check for 2 weeks' pay and a form releasing Hayes Pharmaceutical from any further obligations. Standard corporate farewell package, designed to make problems disappear quietly. 2 weeks, Jordan said. Pretty generous for someone who abandoned his responsibilities, don't you think? I looked at the check, then at the building where I'd spent 8 years ensuring that every product met federal safety standards, where I'd signed my name on documents that could send me to prison if I got them wrong, where Ashley Monroe was probably right now, staring at batch records she couldn't legally approve. "You're right, Jordan. Paperwork is just paperwork." I picked up my box, until it isn't. I walked to my car without looking back, without making a scene, without giving them the satisfaction of seeing me angry. That's what amateurs do. They explode, they threaten, they make themselves look unstable. Professionals document everything and let the system destroy itself. I drove home through the industrial section of town, past the closed steel mill where Dad had worked for 35 years, past the empty factories that had once employed half the neighborhood. The America Jordan Hayes had inherited was built by people like my father, people who understood that shortcuts kill and regulations are written in blood. At home, I opened my laptop and started making phone calls. First to Kevin Murphy at Murphy & Associates, a labor attorney who'd built his practice defending working people against corporate bullies. Kevin had grown up 3 blocks from where I lived, had worked his way through law school loading trucks at UPS. "Kevin, it's Ryan Patterson. I've got a wrongful termination case that's going to be very interesting." "Ryan, I thought you were a lifer over at Hayes. What happened?" "They fired me during FMLA leave for my father's funeral." I was already typing an email with documentation attached. Better yet, they fired the named qualified person 3 days before a $15 million product launch and replaced me with a recent college graduate who doesn't have federal authorization to sign controlled substance batch records. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Kevin's voice, lower and more focused. "Ryan, are you telling me they're currently manufacturing pharmaceuticals without a licensed QP on the premises? I'm telling you that as of this morning, Hayes Pharmaceutical is operating outside federal law, and they've got trucks scheduled to load Friday morning. Send me everything. Don't talk to anyone else, don't sign anything else. I'm going to start drafting papers. Wait, I said. Don't contact them yet. Why not? We can probably settle this for high six figures by Wednesday. I thought about Jordan's smirk, about being called a dinosaur, about Dad's funeral being dismissed as personal downtime. I don't want a settlement, Kevin. I want justice. What are you planning, Ryan? I looked out my window at the rain streaking the glass, thinking about Dad's philosophy that shortcuts always cost more than they save. They've got a major shipment scheduled for Friday morning. If we alert them now, they'll panic, halt production, hire a temporary QP, and pay a fine. Jordan keeps her job, Preston protects his little princess, and they sweep the whole thing under the corporate rug with Daddy's money. And if we wait? If we wait until they actually ship, I said quietly, it becomes interstate trafficking of misbranded pharmaceuticals. That's not a civil violation, Kevin. That's federal prison time. The next 3 days, I became a spider sitting in the center of a digital web. I knew Hayes Pharmaceuticals' production rhythm better than my own heartbeat. Tuesday, raw material weighing. Wednesday, compounding and mixing. Thursday, sterile filling and packaging. Every step required my signature or someone I'd explicitly authorized as my deputy. Since Jordan had fired me before I could authorize anyone, every document Ashley Monroe signed was evidence of federal fraud. I needed intelligence from inside the facility. I couldn't contact my former team directly. Corporate IT monitors all communications for exactly this kind of situation. But the pharmaceutical industry in a mid-sized Indiana city is smaller than people think. Everyone drinks at the same bars, shops at the same grocery stores, and complains about the same bosses. I sent a text to an old number. Coffee at Murphy's Diner, 8 p.m. Bring cash. Logan Pierce slid into the booth across from me that evening, looking like he'd aged 5 years in 3 days. It's complete chaos in there, Ryan. Ashley's walking around with a clipboard, looking like she's trying to solve a calculus problem with crayons. She doesn't know the difference between a batch record and a birthday card. Are they still running production? Full throttle. Jordan's calling it acceleration mode. They've bypassed every single QA hold step. The software keeps throwing error messages, but IT rigged up some kind of override system. My stomach dropped. Bypassing QA holds was like performing surgery with garden tools. Theoretically possible, but guaranteed to end badly. How are they getting around the digital signatures? The system won't let you proceed without QP authorization. Logan looked around the empty diner, then leaned forward like he was sharing state secrets. Jordan ordered AT to hack their own compliance software. They hard-coded an automatic approval using Ashley's login credentials. Every batch record shows her signature, but she's never actually seen half the documents she's supposedly approved. I almost started laughing. It was so clumsy, so beautifully illegal. They weren't just violating FDA regulations, they were creating a digital paper trail of their crimes. Every fraudulent signature, every bypassed safety check, every shortcut they took was being automatically logged and time-stamped by their own computer systems. The Friday shipment? 6 trucks arriving at Loading Dock 4 starting at 6 a.m., straight to Chicago for West Coast distribution. Jordan's planning a champagne celebration in the break room. Logan shook his head. It's disgusting, Ryan. These people have no idea what they're playing with. I slid $50 across the table. Thanks, Logan. Use that to buy the crew some real coffee. And Logan? Document everything. When this goes sideways, you want clean hands. Thursday evening, I made my final preparations. First, a call to Megan Foster at the Indianapolis Business Journal. Megan had been trying to break a story about pharmaceutical industry shortcuts for months. Megan, I've got something for you, but I can't go on record yet. I need you to have a story ready for Friday morning. Title it something like Compliance Questions Raised at Local Pharmaceutical Manufacturer. Keep it vague but ominous enough to make investors nervous. Friday? What happens Friday? Friday is when gravity kicks in. Next, I logged into the FDA Office of Criminal Investigations website and filled out Form 3500A, the Voluntary Adverse Event Reporting System. But this wasn't about adverse events. This was about preventing them. Facility: Hayes Pharmaceutical, 1247 Industrial Boulevard, Indianapolis, in. Nature of complaint: manufacturing and interstate shipment of controlled pharmaceutical substances without qualified oversight. falsification of batch records through unauthorized electronic manipulation, imminent distribution of potentially unsafe products to West Coast markets. I attached every piece of evidence I'd collected: my termination letter showing the date, our FDA establishment license proving my QP status, screenshots of the system overrides Logan had described, and time-stamped photos of the loading dock preparations. The submit button glowed on my screen like a detonator. Once I clicked this, there was no going back. Federal agents would descend on Hayes Pharmaceutical like antibodies attacking an infection. The company would be shut down, people would lose their jobs, and my name would be associated with the destruction of a family business. But then I heard Jordan's voice again. This dinosaur mentality doesn't scream leadership material. I clicked submit. A confirmation number appeared. Case numbered FDA 2024-0847. Thank you for your report. An investigator will be assigned within 24 hours. Friday morning at 5:45 a.m., I drove to Murphy's Diner across from the Hayes Pharmaceutical main gate. Not to work, to witness. I ordered coffee and eggs over easy, sat by the window, and watched the delivery trucks line up like vultures waiting for carrion. At exactly 6 a.m., they started loading. Millions of dollars worth of pharmaceuticals rolling out onto the highway without proper federal oversight. I watched each truck disappear toward Interstate 65, carrying evidence of corporate arrogance to distribution centers across 3 states. At 10:15 a.m., Megan's article went live online. Federal compliance questions surface at Hayes Pharmaceutical following personnel changes. It was a masterpiece of careful journalism, mentioning recent high-level terminations and concerns about regulatory continuity without naming specific names. Just enough to make the stock price twitch and investors start making nervous phone calls. At 10:47 a.m., the black SUVs arrived. FBI, FDA Office of Criminal Investigations, U.S. Marshals. They rolled through the main gate like a federal parade, and I knew Jordan Hayes was about to learn that some problems can't be solved with motivational stickers and corporate buzzwords. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new office at Nordic Biologics, Hayes Pharmaceutical's former biggest competitor. The $1.8 million wrongful termination settlement had been nice, but this job was better. 35% more money, actual respect for experience, and windows that looked out over well-maintained gardens instead of loading docks. Jordan Hayes pled guilty to 3 federal felony charges rather than face trial. The Hayes family business that Preston had built over 30 years was sold for parts to pay legal fees and regulatory fines. Ashley Monroe, the 22-year-old replacement, was never charged. Turns out ignorance actually is a defense when you can prove you had no idea what you were signing. She's now working at a veterinary clinic where the regulations are simpler and the stakes are lower. As for me, I'm Ryan Patterson. I've been ensuring pharmaceutical quality for 25 years. My signature is worth millions, my experience is irreplaceable, and my silence was very, very expensive. Sometimes the best revenge is just letting people destroy themselves while you document every step from a safe distance. Dad would have been proud.